Coming up, writer, director, producer Mel Tolkin joins Illeana in just a minute.
Welcome to Popcorn Talk, featuring movie discussion, news, and interviews. Popcorn Talk. We talk movies.
And now, it's the I Blame Dennis Hopper podcast, starring Illeana Douglas. Eavesdrop with Illeana as she interviews Hollywood's most prominent players about filmmaking, acting, and what really happens on the set of your favorite flicks and TV shows.
That's right. Hello, I am Illeana Douglas. Welcome to the I Blame Dennis Hopper podcast. Here with my lovely co-host, Tamara Berg. I am not like Daniel Day-Lewis. I am not retiring.
Ever.
Get the hook, lady. Anyway, it's great to be here. And I'm very excited to be talking to Mel Tolkin today.
Yes,
Fantastic.
he's a longtime friend of yours.
Yes, writer-director. I've auditioned for him. He's rejected me. And we still remain friends. No, that's another story. We'll have to. I don't know if I don't want to put him on the spot. But he's a longtime friend and obviously great writer and novelist. Novelist of the player, and then also screenwriter of the player.
And has a new book out.
Which is called NK3.
He was telling me a little bit about the story out there, and
Yeah.
it was very funny because it's kind of a complex premise.
Yeah.
And so he was explaining the premise and saying, "Yeah, I don't know how to pitch this book yet." And he's been working on it for years, so it's but it's fascinating.
He's so brilliant and smart, and also loves music. He sent me like very interesting mixtapes of songs that he likes, some country music songs. So he turned me on to the Roach Sisters, and Chris's dad was Mel Tolkin from the Your Show of Shows, and went on to
Right,
work
he was a writer on that show.
Exactly,
right? Yeah.
and All in the Family. So he's just an extremely accomplished writer and nice person, which is, you don't say that.
Bonus.
Yeah, for a writer.
Well, I don't know. It seems like, I have to say, many of the people who are guests on the show are friends of yours. And
Yes.
there hasn't been a dud in the bunch. They're all very nice.
I'm running out of my Rolodex. Although I like to use words that don't exist anymore, like Rolodex. But
Yes.
But yes, I'm scrolling through my friends, and we've got some great people coming up.
Yes, we do.
Randall
Yes, we do.
Kleiser is going to be here to talk about
Yes.
Grease. Elizabeth Perkins, we're going to get her on pretty soon. But
Nice.
I really appreciated everybody's comments about the show, and really seems to be finding our groove. So please listen in.
Yeah.
And
So I have a question
Yes.
for you. I wanted to talk about this. We've talked about Feud, the
yes, which we love.
show
Jessica
on
Lange.
FX. And there was recently an article about Susan Sarandon saying that she'd never seen it.
Right.
And she says that it's always heartbreaking when things are cut, or you look at yourself and you think, well, I could have done better or more
Right.
courageously on that take. So I've just decided to enjoy everyone else enjoying it. So I know we have talked about how you and I agree we don't like criticism.
Right.
So that's, I think, one reason to not watch something at the end. But her perspective of sort of hindsight, and I could have done better, I think it's a reason maybe not to watch. But also, we were talking, John and I were talking about earlier, watching dailies, and
Right.
as you're going, perhaps
Yes.
watching performances. So what's your thought on that, on watching your
Well, it's
performances?
interesting, first of all, just because everything is on a monitor these days and playback, and sometimes you're watching, it's like it removes even needing to see dailies. Obviously when I did in the movies that I've produced, that I've been in, I'm looking at all the dailies. And again, I think that the fear is always, an actor doesn't know how to look at dailies. I'm looking at them really mainly for technical things, technical awarenesses, little foibles that I do, like I'm like Spencer Tracy, I'm always looking for my mark. That's a stupid thing that I do.
Right.
So I always try to, so if I happen to see that, like that
Then
would
you can
drive,
correct.
yeah, that would drive me crazy. Or you're looking for a mic or a piece of tape or something. So that's what I'm always kind of, looking at is to because when you get in the editing room, what people always forget is that you may be great in a scene, and in the old days you'd say you printed take two, right? And,
Right.
But nowadays, it's like the movie, the thing as a whole, you have all these options of the takes, and it's like you're balancing, it's like a mix where you're balancing. You need to be a little bit more friendly here, or maybe you're crying too much here and it doesn't match with the, with the overall. So editing becomes like evening out the performance, and sometimes you're lucky. It's a one regular shot and you'll go back to it. But I know that when I'm editing, I mean, I love looking at the dailies, just because, not everything goes in the movie. Sometimes I would drive my editor crazy, kind of be like, can we go back and look at that thing and see if we could put it in like somehow? Because I fall in love with watching the other actors' performances. Right. I mean, I don't go back and watch if something's on television many years later. I don't find any enjoyment in kind of watching it. When I had to go around with my book tour and they showed Ghost World, I actually did enjoy seeing that, because it wasn't, I had a smaller part in it, so it was fun. It was a print, so I didn't mind seeing the audience reaction to the to the film. So I had to see it a number of times. But some movies that are really personal to me, like Grace of My Heart, it's kind of like you don't have real enjoyment in watching it.
Right.
Comedy series, I have to say, I do enjoy.
You crack yourself up?
Well, yeah, if something is, look at that, Frasier, Seinfeld, or, something like that, where there's not as much onus on it.
Right.
I get a kick out of it.
Right.
There's not much, action. There's not much from a comedy, from a television show, where you're disappointed. I think it's more the dramas that you're like, oh God, I remember that day and that was hard, and
I mean, I have that kind of remorse about conversations I have with people I can't imagine when it's, on a screen.
But I keep a lot of, I have a lot of the dailies from when I did my television show for New Line. I have dailies of actors that auditioned and things like that. Everything's on VHS. It's so that long ago, but I enjoy looking at it, and I don't know, just because I'm an archivist.
Of course,
I like looking at these things. There's a very seductive thing about dailies that is very different than a movie, and you can fall in. I mean, everybody uses this phrase about you fall in love with the dailies, and everyone's watching the dailies, and they go, "We have an amazing movie," and then you see that's where Susan Sarandon. You see the final movie, and you go, "What the hell is this? This has nothing to do with what I made." And every step of the way, there are elements. That's why it's gonna be interesting to talk to Michael Tolkin and the player, and how that could have, and the choice of Robert Altman, and such a great book being turned into a movie, and it's it's such a classic now, and how that didn't get screwed up, and all the interesting elements of the of the film. So it'll be fun.
And what does he feel like when he sees his
I can't wait to ask him.
Let's ask
Well, we should
him.
bring him in.
Let's do it.
Of course, Michael Tolkin is the author of The Player, and also the screenwriter of the great Robert Altman movie, which is called The Player. He also has he's also written the Rapture, directed the Rapture, the New Age. I was outing you before. I was almost in the New Age, and he is the Penn Center Literary Award. My God, look at all these awards that you've won, and your latest book is called NK3, which we have to plug. We have to plug your book, which I'll be excited to read. Ladies and gentlemen, Michael Tolkin. So great. When was the first? Now, we always start with the first movie, but I'm switching it up, because did we meet, how did we meet? Did we meet at a party, or did I audition for you, or did I stalk you? How did I do it?
We did that thing at Cine Family.
Yeah, we did the Nightmare Alley.
Nightmare Alley, right.
Yeah.
Right, that's right.
But I'd met you over the years. I remember
Over
you
the
gave
years,
you gave
right.
me a mixtape of country music songs, which I play all the time.
When did I do that?
You're so funny. You're so funny.
Now my memory is so shot. Oops.
It's so funny. I'm cursed with a good memory. You have that great. You introduced me to the Roach Sisters. There were some.
Wow.
There were some songs that you really
Maggie
liked.
just died.
Yeah,
I know.
yeah. And there was
college with her.
the at the movies, the Merle Haggard.
Wow,
They were special.
That's so.
Am I freaking you out? I could have. I should have done like a psychic thing, like I'm getting a vision.
It's good.
Something.
It's funny. Since I finished the book,
remember that time we went to Paris? We had 2 children. We had a life. Remember?
There were 3.
Oh yes, we lived on the left bank.
There
You were
were
a painter. 3. No. But and you would think as a writer you have do you recall?
I suppose I'd probably be good for the method because I have more of a sense memory recall than I have a data information recall, and so I can remember. I don't know. However, my brain works. If somebody, I'm really bad at remembering people out of context. So I'm really rude.
Yeah.
And or it appears that way. And also, my brother and I look very much alike. I look more like him than he looks like me. So people come up to me often, just look in their eyes, and they think my brother's being rude to them.
Oh,
because
God.
I'm used to this sort of puzzled look that people get because I'm not responding to them, and then I feel like probably I'm that way to people myself, just generally.
Yeah.
So it's not great.
You always seem to me to be very personable and funny. Okay, let's go back to my favorite question. Do you remember the first movie you saw?
Yes.
And who took you to see it?
My mother took me to see Fantasia when I was about 5 years old. This is what I remember.
Yes.
That I was in the playground at the Main Street School in Tuckahoe, New York. So it was 1955, 56. And my mother shows up in the playground, which she was not her. I mean, it wasn't something she often did, and I think I was a little nervous. I don't know what happened, and then she's taking me into the city. I guess whatever it was, they're going to see a weekday screening of Fantasia, and it's a great first movie to take a kid to. You know, and that my parents were both classical music lovers. They were basically my father was born in Odessa before the revolution, and he had a deep Central European sense of culture. So the classical music was in the house all the time. So the music wasn't strange to me, but the vision was unbelievable. And you know, you think about the Night on Bald Mountain sequence, which is really terrifying.
Oh yeah.
Too much probably to take a kid to, and the Rite of Spring with the dying dinosaurs, that's also very powerful, and so I remember that, and Sorcerer's Apprentice. I was Mickey, I was the apprentice.
Yeah.
And then we had the LPs, which were in a boxed set, and Mr. Stokowski. Remember that was Mickey when he's just pulling on Stokowski's
I used to love
tails.
those records when they don't do that anymore, but I you know, in between going to the movies, which was really special, we had you know, Winnie the Pooh and Burr Lives. At least I did, you know, so it was
Burr Lives, big part.
Yeah, so
Right.
we'd listen to all these stories, you know, being told and things like that. You can imagine.
So that movie was, and I don't know this, and then of course I was watching a lot of movies on, you know, on $1 Million Movies. So I grew up with the canon. In the 50s, you know, I don't know, you know, $1 Million Movie was what they showed in New York, and they would show the same movie in rotation for a week or two.
Yeah.
And it was movies from the 30s. So I grew up with Jimmy Cagney was my movie star, you know.
Right.
And the horror movies, I was sort of a Warner Brothers Catholicism, you know, the Angels with Dirty Faces, Cagney and Pat O'Brien, you know, those pairings, those were really powerful to me. And you know, now, I mean, without TCM, I don't know how anybody would have any access to.
I know.
To those films.
Well, plus they have the movies, you know, online, but they're not being curated, so you don't really, you know, you don't get a context sometimes from them. That's
no, but you also, you know, they weren't that old. You know,
right.
they were 15. They were, you know, 15 years, 20 years old.
Right.
which is closer to us now than Chinatown is.
Yeah.
You know, or
God,
The Godfather.
I know.
is,
I still can't
you
believe.
know.
So your dad, of course, was Mel Tolkin.
Yes.
Did you ever? Were you too young to go on the Show of Shows, or did you?
I was, you know,
concept of-
I was really fascinated when I would go to their offices were in the city center, and I was really fascinated when I go to the sidewalk to look up to see where the script had been thrown out the window. Really,
Oh my God! By Sid Caesar.
by Sid Caesar,
oh
you know, my
God.
father would say sometimes, "Oh, they threw the script out the window," and you know, he's 6 years old.
That's a great for
I mean,
future
it's perfect.
writer.
I mean, you know, because I knew that I'd grown up, you know, sort of. I got the sense that Sid Caesar was a volatile person with
Right.
a sense of humor and was very strong. So I had no trouble, you know, as you know, any 6 or 7 year old is capable of temper tantrums. So you know, well, I would throw something out the window.
Right.
So if I would throw something out the window, then a grown up would throw the script out the window.
Yeah. But did you have a sense that it was an enjoyable experience, or was there a lot of pressure? Did anyone ever come home
That's
for
a good
dinner?
question.
You know.
You know, we lived in New York until I was in Manhattan until I was 3, and then we moved out to the suburbs, to Bronxville, Tuckahoe, Westchester, and you know, my father had a long career. He worked from 1948 until about 1970,
Yeah.
into the mid 1970s.
Yeah.
His final show was something called Love Sydney, with Tony Randall, and you know, he made it seem like writing was a profession. You know, you'd go to the office, you'd come back, you'd smell a cigar smoke and pipe smoke. You wore a sport jacket. Didn't always wear a tie, but you always wore a sport jacket and a sweater vest, which all the guys did, and they were all ageless. You know, what I did grow up thinking though was that the purpose of a party was for grown-ups to see if they could make somebody else throw up laughing. so I would be my brother and I would be like at the head of the stairs. We'd listening, and there were the sound of, I guess it was scotch and vodka. I don't know how much gin they were drinking in those days. So it was either scotch or vodka, Canadian or no, the single malt scotch was not there. No, it was Dewar's and
Yeah.
Cutty Sark, and my father's was I think he was a ship on the bottle, and so you'd hear the sound of the ice rattling on the glass. There was obviously one of my jobs as a kid was putting the cigarettes in the cigarette putting cigarette on the coffee tables in these little containers for cigarettes.
I know, it felt like very sophisticated.
Right, and then lots of shrimp cocktail. Hopefully there'd be some blue cheese dip with the shrimp cocktail left over in the morning.
Right.
And you know, Alan Sherman sitting at the piano playing song parodies.
Wow. So did you ever want to be, you or your brother, to be a comedy writer then, or was it a conscious decision?
No. I mean, no, not that way.
Not like punchline,
No.
setup,
No.
joke.
No.
Did any of your family situations make it into the show? Like in the way that
My
Carl-
parents, there was a series of sketches that Caesar did called the Hickenloopers, which was they basically my mother and father's fights.
I love that.
So I think that and
Does one of them involve smashing the car? Is that the Hickenloopers?
Yeah. I don't think so. I think that's just a generic.
Another one,
I
yeah.
think that's a generic bad lady driver.
Okay, well
sketch.
now I'm going to look up the Hickenloopers.
Right, and they took the name. They took the name because they liked it. But then the governor Hickenlooper of Colorado, apparently that family was the name that they used. It's like they thought this was a funny name, but it's
Yeah.
a respectable, reputable,
funny.
politically progressive family.
Did he ever give you, so when you said that, or I guess indicated that you were going to be in show business, did he give you any advice? Do you remember any great advice he gave you?
He went through the sonata form, and he used to like to go through the Beethoven sonata form and say, this is how you structure
Oh.
this is how you structure storytelling. a lesson that I don't think I learned as concretely as he would have liked. But just introducing theme. What I found much more useful to me, musical form was the variations. The Beethoven's variations are more. I see them more as a way of thinking about story more than I think about more than a sonata. Although the Coen brothers used Beethoven in an interesting way in what was the movie, the black and white one with Scarlett Johansson?
The Man Who Wasn't There.
The Man Who Wasn't There, right. So there was really interesting use of Beethoven there, and then in the when I just finished watching the last episode of the season's Fargo, and there was the aficionado. There was a continued use of the Beethoven, which I think for emotionally, but that was a highly woven show, structurally carefully woven, and I'm more interested in taking an idea and then keep going after the idea in as many ways as possible until it can keep breaking it down.
So when you wrote, how old were you when you wrote The Player, as in the novel?
I started it before I had a computer. So it was 1822, and I started it. I was in my early 30s. I had the idea came to me. I was at every writer I knew was unproduced. Everybody, but Hollywood would give you money for a pitch, so people could make a bit of a living in those days. In the early 80s, nobody was writing on spec. It was considered a sign that you couldn't get a deal. It took a while before the spec became, respectable, and I just had this idea one day. I was I stopped at the corner of Beverly Glen and Sunset Boulevard, and I just had this thing came to me that there's a serial killer who's killing writers in Hollywood, but he's getting away with it because nobody sees the pattern because everybody's got a script and in their drawer. And actually, it started with a joke. Somebody told me that there was a man on the street interview, guy going around Hollywood Boulevard saying, "So, how's your screenplay coming?" And he getting an answer from everybody. So that was the beginning of it. And then I put it down. I was typing in those days on yellow paper, cheap yellow paper. And then one day, I had written the first 20 pages, forgot about it, and then one day I opened up my file and saw it was there and said, "Oh, well, I can finish this."
And was it always called The Player?
No, it was called Turnaround, and that was the title I sold it as, and then it turned out there was someone who had written a book called Turnaround, and there's a line in the book that he knew all the players, so it wasn't that jumped out.
Right.
My lawyer at the time, Tom Hansen, said it was the first person I ever heard use the word players in that way. So it just stuck, and then it seemed like it's like anytime you change a title, it's like changing your name.
Right. Yeah.
And anytime you change a title, it's like Catch-22. It wasn't Catch-22. It was something else. And then so what's the right number?
Yeah.
And NK3. That's because there was a memory drug the first two memory attacking drugs failed. So 3 was the one that worked. But it was still, it took a little bit.
Right. So had you, it's, with all I'm thinking, of course, right off the top of my head, What Makes Sammy Run?
Yeah, I had read them. And
that was never made. So I was thinking, it's interesting that was never made into a movie. That's a great book. But
Right.
they've never been able to crack it to make it a movie.
No.
But what do you think, why were they able to... Was it just a better story, or it's still
Well, okay. So what I was doing was writing a Highsmith. There were two. I had a mommy and a dad. Creative mommy and creative daddy that I took as my masters as I was going from being a fitfully employed journalist to trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And I'd been writing scripts, and I felt like, well, I've got to write something, and I'd written a couple of spec scripts at that time already, but I needed to finish. I needed to do a book, and I'd been reading a lot of James M. Cain and reading everything by James M. Cain and everything by Tricia Highsmith, who was still alive.
Right.
And he was a really although he didn't write exclusively about Southern California, he really caught something in Southern California and was really perverse.
Yeah.
And she was also perverse. So there was this, and there's just something in the way she wrote about guilt and misery and aloneness that really just screamed at me. I absorbed both. And the opening line of The Player, just as Griffin suspected, there was a meeting in Levison's office without him.
That's such a great line. It says so much. I mean, it made me laugh because just as you say it, I got so much information.
Right. So it's half taken from it's half taken from one of Highsmith's books, and something like there was a party at the Hidalgos and he wasn't invited, something like that. So I used which is, it's what Faulkner says, don't borrow, steal. So I stole the rhythm of that line. Then my editors said they'd given it they'd given the manuscript to Highsmith for a reading. So I panicked. I thought she was gonna get really pissed. And I'm sure she didn't even remember the line. She'd written 35 books, and that was just one line among many. And I actually I got a jacket blurb from her so I was very excited.
Wow,
about
that's
that.
amazing.
Yeah.
And so, how long was it between writing the book and then the idea to make it into a movie and them asking? I mean, it seems like quite a privilege that you actually got to do this.
Well, okay. So one thing about the book. So I had written the script for a movie that became Gleaming the Cube, and a skateboard movie with Kristian Slater, and I got a lot of money for it in those days, and then it's back again to being a lot of money these days. There was a point at which what the option price for the book wasn't so big, and then it's when people are getting $4 million for some movies, scripts that didn't get turned into movies. But I did something. I decided I was instead of parlaying The Player into more Gleaming the Cube into more movie work, I bought a year to finish the novel because I really wanted to do that. Then the book, and then how it became a movie is sort of interesting. Well, I guess it's interesting. Otherwise,
yeah. I mean, they just did a big Criterion.
Right. No. And so the book was sold to Grove Atlantic, who have been my publisher since then. And there's an editor named Terry McDonald who was the editor of Manhattan Inc., which was a magazine that Clay Felker had. Remember Clay Felker? He was in New York Magazine. So it was a business magazine, it was sort of a hip business magazine. And they took the Larry Levy story, the Peter Gallagher, the subplot, and he edited it out, and it turned into a perfectly respectable short story. And they ran it in the magazine. So David Brown, the great David Brown, every week would make his rounds of phone calls to editors, and not everybody who might have read a good piece of material. So one of the people he called routinely was a guy named Ned Chase, who was an editor. He was Chevy Chase's father and was an editor at Random House, or one of the big houses. And Ned Chase had flown from LaGuardia to Miami and had picked up Manhattan Inc. at the airport. And when Brown called him, Brown said, "Have you read anything interesting?" And Ned Chase, "Well, actually, I just did. I just read this short story set in Hollywood. You might like it." And that's how David Brown found the book.
Wow.
So he called my agent and offered a $2,500 advance on the book. So my agent fired me.
What?
Yeah, my agent fired me. There wasn't enough money. There wasn't enough money. I was too small a client.
He wasn't impressed by the David Brown?
No. My agent had also said that he was working on his own Hollywood novel. So he.
Oh, wow, that sounds more. Sounds more like it.
So
I've got my own.
So
script.
Brown said, look, I can't give you I can't give you much, but I'll make you my 50% part. I'll make you my partner on this. So what was interesting to me was that a book which I thought was too internal to be turned into a script took me 6 weeks to convert into a screenplay.
And did you have any problems at all in terms of cracking it or
no
narrowing?
No, the only thing was that I mean, there's a lot of, not stream of consciousness, because it's not set up that way, but Griffin is in the book. Griffin is constantly weighing cause and effect and suspicion, and everything is thought through, and so I had to give up a lot of that, and I had to keep it's he's looking for someone who's sending him threatening letters. He kills this person. He's under suspicion, and he gets away with it, but not without falling in love with the woman of the fiance of the guy he killed, and that plot, was like a Ripley book. That was what I was trying for. Excuse me. That's what I was trying for, and that plot was a solid basic genre plot.
And then how does Robert Altman, because you wouldn't think he was the likely choice to direct.
No, there was the Mark Rydell version.
I wouldn't think that was the likely
with
from
Chevy Chase. It's sort of coming back, and Chevy.
Wow. So, how did you feel about that? I mean, nothing against Mark
No,
Rydell or Chevy Chase,
well,
but that's a
that
very different movie.
It's a different movie.
Even though his dad.
Yeah, but it was just one step along the way. Altman had been in Europe. His career was in the tank.
Yeah.
He came back to L.A. He was kind of not. He was looking around for something. He switched agencies. He went to William Morris, where I was at that point, and somebody gave him the script. Wow. And I was told that he was supposed to go pick up somebody at the airport, and he was reading the script and just said, you go.
Yeah.
And then we got along okay, I met Julian Fellows at a party the 2 nights before he won his Oscar for Gosford Park, and I got introduced to him, and he said, it took him a minute to realize that we were kindred. He said, "Oh, you and I know a secret no one else can understand." And I said, "Yeah, and you're going to win the Oscar," which none of his other writers had done since MASH, because when making Gosford Park, Altman needed Julian Fellows to make sure that the table settings were correct, so he couldn't throw the writer off the set. and that was also, it was a really great script.
Yes, it was. Well, John Frankenheimer did always, he would want the writer. He'd always, cast the writer, put the make sure the writer. He liked having the writer.
He directed something that I wrote.
He did?
Yeah, the Burning Season for HBO.
Oh, that was an incredible. But
I only got to meet him. I got to meet him in a lobby once at the DGA.
Tough guy, but impressive.
Yeah,
intimidating.
Yeah, he was intimidating. But he did a great job.
Impressive body of work.
Yeah.
And so having Robert Altman on as the director, was there any fear because he's improvisational that he'd throw out your script? Or
no,
that's what I would be.
One of the things that I learned, and I've learned this just generally. I learned this. I mean, this really deep impact. I learned this a lot from Deep Impact too, which is that sometimes the line of dialogue has to be read the way it's written. But the writer's real job, I think, is in working with the director is to guard the intention. And if the intention requires that a line be there, or that a particular piece of information not be lost because you need that for the story,
right?
Then you fight for that. But Altman had his, again, it comes back to what I said before about theme and variations. So you write your theme as just one line of dialogue, and then somebody comes along and finds a different way of saying it. It's like that scene in the last Coen Brothers movie in Hail Caesar, where the cowboy actor is in the, I can't remember the line of dialogue, but he's trying to. The English director wants him to say a line of dialogue he can't say.
Right.
He just can't say it. So finally, he finds a succinct way to say it, and it works. Now, of course, this is art, so it's not the same thing. But I'm not. With Altman, I learned not to be precious about. The only part I think that he might have let go of, which might have been kept up the suspense, which is that he in the book and in the scripts that I wrote, Griffin is still being pursued by the postcard writer, and Altman dropped that, and he's also, and it just, I felt like there's one more layer of suspense, of paranoia, like something else he can't shake, would have served the just the straightforward entertainment. But the last time I hadn't seen the movie in a long time, and then I saw it projected a couple of years ago, and things that had been bothering me about it, it didn't bother me anymore, and I made my peace with it.
That's so interesting. That's what we were talking about at the beginning. Sometimes, you see something years later, and it's actually, you go, oh, this is actually pretty good.
Yeah.
I think you're harder on things when
Right.
when they
They're
first
fresh.
Well,
Yeah.
when the morning Deep Impact opened, and the reviews were mixed, I was really unhappy with the movie. And then by the end of the weekend, it had made, I don't know, $75 million, something like that. And I had my opinion about it changed drastically. But
Yeah.
I went to see it 3 times that first week
Yeah.
in the theater, because I just wanted to sit with an audience and say, okay, fine. I wasn't happy with the way this turned out.
Right.
And everybody's coming up to me telling me that they love the movie as though they had seen my personal first draft shot for them.
Right.
Where all these things that I had been very frustrated with had dissolved in something else, and again, that just, I think the lesson was clarity of intention, as long as, particularly if everybody's intentions are in line. Even if people are if they want to make, everybody wants to make something serious, and they've got to, they're all working towards the same goal, and they understand that goal.
Right.
Then I think you've got a better chance of working, and not to be all screwed up over being precious about a line.
And was the player, or Tim Robbins, was it based on anyone in particular? Or, I mean, I know when I see it, it reminds me, there's somebody it does remind me of, but is it an amalgamation?
No, it's an amalgam. There was one studio executive who had put me on hold and never came back. And so you said you'd get back to me. Became the postcard writer.
Yeah.
And then a friend of mine told me about this. Was at the time shared the same story about it to somebody else, an agent he'd had, who said, "Wait, just 1 second," and didn't speak to me for another 3 years.
Well, I think that the look of him as an agent, I mean, that's just when I landed in L.A. and all. That was the sort of the wardrobe of choice for all the CAA agents were.
Right, and the Range Rover.
Yeah. So some of the the Range Rover, So,
right.
So all of those things it's interesting, are not dated. That's one of the things that's great about the movie. Nothing in it is dated.
No.
It's only more so. It's only like people saw the Range Rover, and then more people bought the Range Rover, because of that.
Yeah, I think maybe partly because my own part of that, which is that if you were to say, if you'd ask the question, so what was what was your first movie, and then what's your favorite movie? I would say La Dolce Vita. And what I like about neorealism, and where I'm also a child of neorealism, is that society at as it's reconstituting itself.
Right.
To me, what I understand about neorealism is, and then what we lose watching it now, is all these people had lived, if you go starting with Open City where you can see it, they'd all lived through the war. They'd all seen the Germans in the streets. They'd all seen cities being bombed.
Right.
And then you look at the movies and it's gone. It's erased. There's no, there's Rome is being rebuilt, and so the problems now are the problems of a society which is decaying even as it's being reconstructed. That is something that I think I hopefully I absorbed, so that if the style of the player is holding, it's because it's also a picture of a society. It's not just about the guy who killed
Right.
the writer.
Right. It's so spot on as a social commentary, but then how do you, when it comes out and it's a huge success, is there any fear of now I'm at the Ivy and I'm reliving, am I in the movie? I mean, because it was like over.
Who's paying for the lunch?
Well, I mean, what I'm saying is it must have been felt like overnight success, but yet success came to you relatively later.
Right. Altman said it. We're indicting ourselves.
Right.
I mean, I think that was. He said two things. He said it's a protest march. All right. That was how he got the the movie stars to be in it as extras, but also, that was something that well, I used it as in an epigraph for the book before this. That's William Carlos Williams. The poem is a capsule wherein we wrap up our punishable secrets. We write for this that the seed come true. So if your punishable secrets are there in the open for everybody to see, but it's coded.
Right.
It's not just it's not confessional. It's something deeper than confession.
But so you went immediately. Did you have the Rapture written before?
Rapture was made with the Rapture. Okay, so the.
I mean, so it was quite a year.
Now we started out talking about bad memory. This is a book about memory. I'd written the Rapture as a short subject. Nick Wexler, the producer, read it and said, well, actually, my agent who dropped me over the player, but at the time he did something good. He sent it. He introduced me to Wexler. So Nick read it and said, if you write this as a full length, I think we can get it made. That was true, and the player was in production while the Rapture was in post. And there was a chance there had been a suggestion that I direct the player, but I didn't want to fail at something I'd already succeeded.
That's very smart.
I didn't want to. It's like the book was the book, and translations around the world, and I had proven to myself that I could do that, and I didn't want to jump on that, and I didn't want to go after it another way.
Right.
I just wanted to tell other stories. That was after that I got into the New Age.
So I want to talk about the Rapture a little bit,
Sure.
because again, just I don't know, it's just a movie that is about with religious subject, and how did you even come upon an idea to do a movie about the Rapture? Are we in it? Are we post-Rapture?
No,
what are we in now?
No. They're in the White House. They're in the White House now.
So again, it's a good movie for people to go back and take a look at now, because it seemed like fantasy back then.
Yeah, but one of the ways we sold it, points we sold it was like there's 35%.
Frightening.
There's 35 million evangelicals in the country who believe that this is true. I was watching a lot of evangelical TV on because cable had just come in, and I was obsessed with it. And then there was a case of a Japanese woman who was despondent, living in LA, and had drowned her 2 children and I think herself.
Wow.
And I was just thinking about cultural differences and how, as awful it is, it's like you could it wasn't the same thing as child abuse. It wasn't sadistic. It was out of grief, and And then I was interested also in the idea of being born again and being saved. So all those ideas were swirling around.
Mm-hmm. So it's got and then the New Age also deals, it's back in LA, and it's got that same, these ideas of spiritual values and emptiness of the characters. I mean, it's another wonderful film and kind of document, people searching for something.
Things come out of conversations, I mean, a lot of the, you have obsessive conversations with people, and you keep coming back to certain themes. The New Age,
Prescient film? I mean,
yeah, it didn't do well when it came out. It kind of killed me as a director. But I got when Adam West died 2 weeks ago, I got a lot of, I'm on Facebook, so I got a lot of messages from people commenting on how that was his best performance, and Jonathan Lethem, the novelist, contacted me about that, and it's a hard thing to talk about that. It's hard for me to talk about that film because I there's a lot of times I kick myself over mistakes I made or things I could have done differently. But then I saw it again, I said, well, I don't know what everybody's fucking complaining about. It's good.
Well, again, it's a very prescient film. I think the idea of everybody, of somebody losing everything and going, happened in, 10 years ago when the stock market crashed. And
right. Well, I was, that one was inspired by a guy who I used to see when Melrose Avenue was the fashion street.
Yes.
In the mid 80s, before it was goth T-shirts, but it was the place where one strolled and bought things. And there was this guy working in one of the menswear stores, bought a couple of shirts from him. Just something distinctive about him, so I remembered him. Then he started his own shop, and he had sealed up, for whatever stupid reason, you couldn't see the inside of the shop from the street. There were 3 arches, and he had sealed them up. He painted them over. So he didn't even have window displays. So he was like too cool, and whatever the name of the store was. So I thought, this isn't going to work. And then he started 10% off, 20% off, 30% off. And then that motif, and then I started watching other stores on Melrose, and I saw, first the 10% off sale, that sign's not going down. Then it's 20. Then it's set. One point is that everything must go. So that decline became the decline of Melrose became the inspiration for the movie.
But again, it seemed for Judy Davis and that Peter Weller, it just feels very prescient.
Yeah.
Again. Like we know couples like this who live in Brentwood that.
Right. Well, I mean, even how many? What's the statistic? How many people are even in the middle class are a month away from starvation?
Yeah, living check to check.
Living check to check. How how little people have in their savings.
Yeah.
And then and Adam West is Adam. That Adam West is going to survive.
Yeah.
He's got this. He's got a case study house up in the hills. He steals there's this beautiful saleswoman who's selling a jacket to him and to Peter. Peter gets it instead of him, but he gets the girl. And he's sadistic and undermining and a horrible father. Bounces a check on his son, not because he doesn't have the money, but because he doesn't want to make good on the promise. So yeah, and we're at this cutthroat moment, and we're at this terrible moment. Just
post Rapture. I also like that it explores, kind of the predatory people, not that they are, but, the yoga instructors and the health food people that are taking advantage of people that have no moral compass, that have no direction, that think if I drink green goo, that's going to make my life better. If I go to a, strip, what is it? Like they had the stripping pole exercise, like every week there's a new gimmick.
Right.
And it's like snake oil salesmen.
Well, we're in a really fucked up place right now. And everybody's looking for...
Well, where's the irony?
I don't know. That's a really good question.
The New Age had irony.
That's a really interesting question. Because I was having this conversation a couple of days ago with somebody and sort of like the structure of writing something, which is irony, theme, metaphor, and theme. And the irony of a situation being the engine for a story, and I think that our irony right now, we're so screwed up. Isn't it ironic that this country that was on the verge of the North finally winning the Civil War, finally, winning. Isn't it ironic that the South won the Civil War 150 years after the war is over? And that's not funny.
Yeah.
And it's how do you make something? How do you make art in this time that can stand?
I think that's very difficult. What is the answer? Do you just go to things you're passionate about?
Yeah, but I thought it was interesting at the Oscars that moment when it looked like La La Land had won, but then I went to Moonlight, that it seemed like whatever, La La Land was obviously, people had very split opinions about it, but one thing I thought about it was that it was made by people who lived in a world where they expected Hillary to win. They believed that was a movie that it felt like that you can dance in the traffic. But if you live in LA, say no, you can't dance in the traffic. So because I think some people were looking at the dancing, and all I thought, what I kept seeing was they haven't patched the cracks in the pavement. The side, the road bed, the road is still, the freeway that they rented is still cracked. And if it was my movie, would I have said we cannot have them dancing on cracked freeway? And I don't know, that's an illusion that they needed to maintain. Whereas Moonlight, whether or not, however the election went, Moonlight was made by people who lived in a world where the Trump election was possible, and where the grief of the country was, which is a movie about grief and overcoming grief, and this is a country that is intensely afraid of its own grief, which is why we keep electing.
Well, there's a lack of empathy. That's something that I always think about.
Right, but I think empathy is empathy for suffering is the ability to tolerate, is the ability to accept somebody else's grief, and to either want to do something, and to either hopefully to try to do something about it, but also to tolerate or even to tolerate your own helplessness. To tolerate your inability to change something without then rushing to to the denial that there's something wrong, so that you get to the ultimate denial, the denial that the world is heating up.
Right. Well,
because that's too, I think.
Back to the rapture.
Well, yeah, but I think that the people, the saddest, most hopeless people in the country are the people who voted for Trump, because they can't bear the thought. They can't. The panic that sets in if they were to wake up and they say, "Holy shit, the scientists are right. 127 degrees in Phoenix in June. That's the planet dying. We have to do something about it, or even if we can't do anything about it, or maybe we can't do anything about it, so then what?" And they can't live with that pain. They can't live with that. They can't live with the conflict.
I agree. If that's the climate, then it is challenging to write a story that you think, who am I writing the story for?
Or how do you capture how do you do something which doesn't add to the warming in the broadest sense of that? And
I think the stories are happening locally. That's just my own instinct.
what do you mean?
Well, like that if you go to like when I go visit my family back east in Connecticut, and they live in a small town, is like to go back to a smaller town, be a little bit off the grid, you find genuinely interesting stories, historical stories. I go back in history, and maybe that's the answer of making things not as topical. I'm just saying, as a writer, as a creative person.
Or you find the topical by going back into history.
Yeah, that you
That's what Shakespeare did, and he's getting into trouble for it even now.
Great events, historical figures. I mean, like I love Lafayette. That's just a personal favorite of mine. General Lafayette,
Right.
who was kicked.
Why?
Because he was kicked out of France. Like this, for me, talk about irony. He was a doofus in France. He was tall. He couldn't dance. His mother thought he was a complete embarrassment to the court, and they called Washington and said, "Could you please just take him under your wing?" And he was a complete doofus, and at one point, apparently he even led the troops the wrong way, but it turned out to be a success. So he became an accidental hero in America. In his own country, people thought he was a complete imbecile. But
Did he ever go back?
yeah, he was later, he had his head cut off. He comes back, so he's a hero in America. There's Lafayette Square and Lafayette Park, and we applaud him as a hero. But he went back to France,
he was a Yutz.
thinking he was going to be welcome. He funded the troops, Washington's troops, got them new uniforms. He comes back to France. It changed nothing, and he was eventually imprisoned and had his head cut off, and he died. And he was buried with the dirt from Bunker Hill in his grave.
Wow.
And so I think that what I do as a creative person is like I do like to go back, and I think that that's such a compelling narrative and story. And then I guess you're right. Then you bring it into,
Or it's just a great story.
But I love things like that. I mean, I love history, and
I'm just cleaning out my library, and I pulled down. We've got this large collection of American heritage magazine.
Oh, yes.
Set.
Yes.
So now I there's a million stories in that.
That pique your interest. Now I want to talk just briefly about a movie of yours that you wrote that I love, which is Deep Cover.
Yes.
That is it's almost like a cult. I mean, it was a big hit, but by director Bill Duke.
Yeah.
It's a great movie. Would you call it a noir or neo-noir?
I don't know. I'd rather. I mean, or it's the first hip hop film. There was this great moment in what was the movie about the LA rappers? NWA? What was it called?
Straight Outta Compton?
Straight Outta Compton.
Yes.
Where they're in the recording studio, and Dr. Dre is working on something, and one of the, not Biggie Smalls, one of the gangsters comes in, and he's introduced to Snoop Dogg, and he says, "We're doing the soundtrack for Deep Cover." so I didn't know that was going to come there. And I saw it at the ArcLight, and I almost punched the arm of the guy sitting next to me, total stranger. I did that one.
That's me.
That's fantastic. You're a cultural reference.
I was in Hawaii years after the movie came out, and I wanted to go hiking on the Nepali coast, and I called a friend of mine in the Hawaiian Film Board, and I said, "Look, I know you have to make reservations for this months in advance. Is there anybody, can you just say?" And I said, "I don't want to say I'm here to scouting locations. I don't want to lie." She said, "Well," so I was given the name of somebody to speak to at the county office where they hand the tickets so you could, where they give you the pass so you could go on the trail, and clearly I was jumping way ahead of the line, and these wonderful Hawaiian people were. This is their sacred coast, and I'm just another guy who's like fucking coming in, and wanting to like overload the quota system for the day, and they said, well, look, I said I'm film board. They asked me, said I'm love the beauty of the island. Look, so yeah, what have you written? So I said, well, Deep Cover. So boom.
Right this way, sir. Right this way, sir. Right this way.
So yeah, exactly.
Deep cover.
So you never exactly.
Mahalo.
Brother, it's exactly that's exactly the treatment I got. Which again, it's like it told something true, and so.
Well, it's all your movies have the. Have that somebody doing wrong, kind of living with the consequences of what they did wrong, what they're going to do. I mean, they do seem sort of like noir themes.
Well, that's the I just said it before. No. Highsmith and who did I just say was my James M. Cain.
James M. Cain.
Right, that's the James M. Cain part.
Yeah. And I love that,
Yeah.
moral ambiguity.
Right, and well, it's moral ambiguity for one person, but not for the rest of the world. He's and because one of the things that one of the things that I did with the player that one of the ideas I had was as I was writing it was the trend taking your guilt and turning it into neurosis. Mm-hmm. So he's committed a murder. Maybe provoked a little bit, in the book much more clearly just fuck it, I'm gonna kill this asshole.
Right.
In the movie, Altman had it played so that the provocation, was so they were provoking into a fist fight, and that there was water so that Vincent D'Onofrio drowned, and in mine he just chokes him to death. In the book he just choked him to death. But where that went in both cases was coming to taking guilt, taking moral guilt, turning that into neurotic guilt, and being able to live with it as a neurosis and guilt, being able to live with it as an existential category rather than not existential is the wrong word. Oh, there I am.
That's me. That's you.
Wow.
It's a movie within a movie within a movie.
So, yes, I think was that clear, or did I just get?
That
really
was very
fuzzy?
clear.
Okay,
unfortunately, I wish I could keep talking to you, but I want to just talk a little bit about again your book, which just came out,
Great.
And tell us what the book is about.
NK3.
Available
4 years ago,
now.
a South Korean colonel stationed along the demilitarized zone was in the. I almost feel like reading the jacket copy because it's hard for me to take the book.
Yeah.
It's hard for
You
me.
can read it.
All right.
Do it.
Read it to
All right,
us.
so, okay,
I
so
love it.
4 years ago,
And now a reading by Michael Tolkin.
a South Korean colonel stationed along the demilitarized zone was in the midst of complaining to his sergeant about boarding school tuition when a platoon of North Korean soldiers dressed in hazmat suits approached on the opposite side. 2 of the soldiers carried a hose to the top of a multi-story ladder and began to spray a mist across the border. An attack. Now, in post-NK3 Los Angeles, a new aristocracy lives in a vast compound surrounded by a fence 60 feet tall. The gateway into this privileged class is a half-broken computer at the DMV, the Department of Mandatory Verification, where individuals are matched to their pre-crisis identities and selected based on practical skill from the old world. Their life inside the fence is a perpetual orgy. Outside, thousands of mindless drifters and shamblers serve the elite, harvesting food and other supplies from the old box stores and distribution warehouses to fuel the gift economy until their work is no longer needed. Their ruler, chief, seeks guidance from the 2 gigantic statues called the man and the woman. They warn him of trouble to come. But who is the person to watch? The elusive Ekman, holed up with the last functioning plane at LAX? Shannon Squire, the chisel-wielding pop superstar from pre-NK3 world? Hopper, an uncommon drifter compelled by an inner voice to search for a wife whose name and face he doesn't remember, or a treacherous member of Chief's own inner circle?
Wow. That seems...
So it's hard for me to pitch it. It's easier to sort of...
No, that just seems really good. And for those of us who live in Los Angeles, oh my God, the way these... every day, I drive the same route to my dance class, and each day, they call, the tent cities that were only downtown have reached, they're up to Highland now, and they're up to, and it's like, I don't know at what point we're going to acknowledge, there's nowhere for people
Right.
live.
So that's the book is about that. It takes this the crisis is that the entire world has been affected by this.
Yeah. It reminds me of early Hollywood, when they had the little, the communities, people living in shacks, the shanty towns, that we laugh about in silent movies. It's like, he's living in shanty town.
Yeah.
And we're back, I feel like we're back there, but now with guns as opposed to people, cooking out, because people...
In a barrel.
Yeah, people living in these shanty towns and going to pick fruit.
Right, and they can't get housing.
And they're angry, and they're on drugs.
They're angry, and they're on drugs, and there's the opioid epidemic. I mean, everything is coming to and now healthcare is being stolen from the people.
Yeah, so so the novel seems, again, right
Right,
kind of
right.
frightening.
Well, it's interesting.
Good summer reading.
There was an article in the New Yorker this last week by Jill Lepore covering dystopian novels as a whole. It turned out I was not the only person saying the world is falling apart, and so she talks about the book a little bit, and in the end she's frustrated with all of the writers for their pessimism or our pessimism.
Wow.
But I don't know, it's not. I don't think it's. What can be prescriptive in art without it being propaganda? And I don't know. I mean, I'm just watching. I've been watching TV more than movies, as most of us are these days. So I watched. My wife and I watched Master of None, the 3rd season, and I wept at a few times at the ending of a couple of the episodes. And I was trying to figure out, so is it because they're modeling mercy, or love? Is it unfairly jerking tears, or is it actually something, or are they doing something profound? And it's something I've been doing a lot lately, which is like watching, what am I crying at? I'm very emotional these days. Watching Jimi Hendrix and Roy Otis Redding at Monterey Pop. So here's the Monterey Pop story. So I was there at Monterey Pop.
Well, 50th anniversary.
Yeah, I was there, I know. So, and every time I've seen the movie 3 times, and every time I see the movie, and I've gone over and watched it at home, look for myself, can't see it. Where am I? So there's this new documentary about the Grateful Dead on Amazon, and this great documentarian named Amir Barlev is a friend of mine. Amir Barlev made the movie. So I'm watching the film, go to Monterey Pop because the Dead were there. There's a shot of Janis Joplin dancing, singing, and there's a wide shot of the audience, and then punch in for a close-up of me. It's great.
Fantastic.
Oh, yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Is that
16 years old.
Oh, I have to. What's the name of the movie? One more time.
It's the movie is the Grateful Dead documentary on
Amazon.
It's called Long Strange Trip. It's
wow.
the second. It's in the second chapter.
That sounds amazing.
It's really fast.
All right. Well, I will look for it in that, and please come back.
This is fun. Are we done already? It's
unfortunately.
Over? Oh.
Unfortunately, but please come back.
I'd love to.
I foresee your book being made into a series. I mean,
we're trying to.
Yeah, I foresee that.
This was great. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Please come back. Anytime.
Okay.
Next time we'll get to our favorite movie. We love Nightmare Alley.
I just saw an incredible mentalist act in New York. An English guy, something Darren, and he did. I don't know how he did it, but he was like, that was what the movie was. He was as spooky as the movie.
I still think Nightmare Alley is one of the creepiest, most disturbing.
Yeah.
movies with a major movie star.
Yeah.
That's what's so disturbing about it, is that it's Tyrone Power, and
right.
it gives me nightmares. It's got nightmare in the title. There's a reason.
Nightmare Alley on Elm Street.
Yeah. There you go.
Right. Michael Tolkin.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you so much.
Michael's website is michaeltolkin.com.
Yes.
Also, he's on Twitter at Michael_Tolkin. Thank you very much for being with us. And you can buy Illeana's book, I Blame Dennis Hopper, on Amazon and in bookstores. Also, check out our Facebook page. The website is illeanaspodcast.com.
Yes, and like I say, everyone's life is a movie with a beginning, middle, and an end. We're only at the end of our podcast. We've got much more
living to do.
To go, much more writing to do. But Michael Tolkin, thank you so much for,
Great, thank you.
for being
Thanks,
here.
everybody.
Thanks.
Bye.
Oh.
From producers Maria Menounos, Kevin Undergaro, Phil Svitek, and the entire Popcorn Talk Network, we would like to thank you for tuning in. For questions or comments, be sure to visit popcorntalk.com. I'm Sir Richard Wentworth, and this has been a presentation of the Popcorn Talk Network. The views expressed herein are those of the hosts only and do not necessarily reflect the views of the Popcorn Talk Network or its owners or principals.